All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from lunch, or if you stayed out real late last night, good morning. We're getting started now with a nice talk on the NANOG.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed lunch. My name is Christian O'Flaherty. I work for the Internet Society. I'm here with a couple of colleagues, one from LACNIC, Arturo. You probably met him during one of the BOF meetings, and Eduardo from NIC-BR. We are all involved in what we call NANOG, which is both meeting and mailing list. It's like a community as NANOG is, but for South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. So if you are interested in any of these countries and the internet businesses and operations there, then probably you will be interested in our project, which is NANOG. We already had a meeting last year. It was announced, by the way, on the previous NANOG meeting, which was the 50 NANOG meeting, like a milestone for you and also for us. Which there we announced our first NANOG meeting. We took place in Brazil last year in October. We did in Sao Paulo. Actually, it wasn't in the city. It was far away from the city. It was near the airport, and we did there because it was free of charge, and we wanted people really committed and interested in the event to make the effort to go there. So during the week there were three main meetings during the whole week. One was the NANOG event. It took 2 days. The other one was the LACNIC Public Policy Forum, which was the second in the year. It's the first time that we had two public forums like the airing, but for our region. So the second one took place during the NANOG week. And also the PTT Forum, which is a Brazilian meeting for traffic exchange and basically owners of AS numbers there. So probably Eduardo is going to tell you more about that shortly. We've got a very good attendance at that time, more than 300 people during the week. Actually, there were like 500 registered, but none of them were there. At any one time, there were more than 200 participants on all meetings. They were representing 24 countries. This is the geographical distribution of the participants. We created a program committee with representatives from organizations, vendors, and service providers in the region. We wanted them all represented. We are still working. The same group is going to be involved in the future NANOG meeting. Here are some pictures that we took during the event and a small social. The social wasn't as nice as ours yesterday, but it was a good one. We'll try to make a big effort for the next one. And
it's going to be hard.
Yes, it's going to be.
We'll try our best.
Yeah, we will try. We will try. So, what about the next one? We are working in two events for 2011. Actually, it's going to be a short one. We call it a session during the LACNIC week. The LACNIC week is going to take place in May in Cancun, Mexico. So during this week, there's going to be a LACNOG Day, a session. We are not going to make call for presentations for this session. It's just going to be a panel, and there we will launch the call for presentations. We'll launch the group, the program committee for the next one, the big one, which is going to be in October, the week before the NANOG meeting. So for all of you interested in the region, you can you will probably have direct flights from Santiago, if we make it in Santiago, or from Buenos Aires to. Actually, there are no flights from Buenos Aires to Philadelphia, but it's not going to be hard to attend both. So this is going to be on October the 3rd. We will be announcing the different dates on the mailing list for the call phone presentations and the agenda and when we open the registrations. So all of you are welcome to participate on the mailing list, of course, to participate on the meeting. And if any of you would like to add something.
Well, before the presentations, they can be, if you want to present, normally we speak there in Spanish or Portuguese, but the presentation can be in any of those, well, it can be in any language, in fact, so we have translation services there. So if you want to present, you don't have to present in Spanish or Portuguese, you can present in English.
There were many presentations during the past event in English, and there are many participants on the list that are using English, and all of us can easily understand. So you feel free to participate in whatever language you want. Dave.
Dave Meyer. I just want to say I've given a couple presentations at LACNIC, and for those who would be worried about the language barriers, if your Spanish is rusty or whatever, it's extremely friendly to non-native Spanish speakers, so I wouldn't consider that to be a barrier in any way whatsoever.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eduardo from NIC.br. I'm directly involved in the Internet Exchange Point project in Brazil called PTT Metro. The event that Christian told is called PTT Forum. PTT Forum is an annual event. This year will take place in the end of November, so 30 November and 1st December. If anyone has interest in Internet Exchange in Brazil, Latin America, please join the Peering Tracking. We'll probably do a brief presentation about the project, or even contact me directly here. Okay, thanks.
And we are also organizing a day for traffic exchange discussions during the LACNIC meeting in May. So both peering and traffic exchange issues and in general operational issues are going to be covered during that meeting. So all of you are invited to both meetings. So feel free to contact us if you need additional details or information about them. So thank you very much. Any questions?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. That sounds real interesting if you're doing business in the LACNIC region, Argentina, Chile in October. Manish?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Switch over to number 2.
Can I just... That works. Hi, I'm Manish from the research group at Merit, and what I want to talk about today very briefly is some traffic analysis we've done on recently as of 3 months ago, allocated /8 blocks. In particular, here's the framework that we use for our darknet collection and analysis. So what we do is we work with the RIRs, we go ahead and get their permission to advertise and collect this data, and then at the tail end of it, what our purpose is to make this data available to the research community. But for the RIRs in particular, what we want to do is make recommendations on what they can do to watch out for potential hotspot activity or areas of the address space that they should stay away from or not allocate to customers. So roughly our goal is analyze the data, determine how much and what kinds of pollution there is, and whether there's hope for cleanup or simply to quarantine those blocks and not hand them out. In this particular study, and I'm calling this part 2 because I've done one of these earlier on a different set of blocks, we were looking at 6 /8s, and we collected several data sets. The data set that I'll be describing the analysis on today consists of one set of 3 /8s which were announced simultaneously, and then the other 3 were announced at different time frames. There's another data set that was collected for 7 contiguous days of all 6 /8 announcements. So if you were watching the internet routing table, you would have been very, very amused to see such large announcements suddenly appear. So here's a comparison of the traffic volumes that we're seeing in these /8s. The 37, the 45, and the 100 on top were the ones that were announced simultaneously. And what is really cool about the analysis, about this data this time, is that we're actually able to see simultaneous activity in all three blocks. And those spikes that you're seeing there were essentially, we analyzed them a little bit more, dug in, and those were backscatter from what we think is denial of service attacks for the DNS servers. We're trying to confirm some of this with the folks at VeriSign. The bottom three graphs are the ones that were the disjoint announcements. And what you're seeing there across most of them is that the traffic volumes are fairly consistent, except for the 5/8. Now, the 5/8 was a surprise for us in this whole study. The 5/8 is almost, or it's much more polluted than anything else we've seen. Well, as long as you don't include the 1/8. You're seeing peaks of as much as 250 megabits per second of traffic. And most of it, as it turns out, is headed towards, easily memorizable, human understandable addresses like 5.5.5.5 and large bursts of UDP streams essentially targeted for those addresses. Another surprise in this study for us was the 45/8. Now, this one is actually reclaimed space and reallocated. We expected to see all sorts of stuff in there, but we found exactly the opposite. It was one of the cleaner blocks. So this was a very surprising thing because 45/8 has been the interop address space, and to see it surprisingly clean was very interesting. So let's dig in a little bit more. Our purpose here, once again, was to find hotspots and figure out what we can do to contain the damage. The hotspot, so these graphs are the 6 graphs comparing the CDF function of the destination /24 address space. So if you see a straight line, what that means is the address is uniformly distributed across the entire space. There are no hotspots. If you see a curve, it means that there's very strong hotspot activity. That means a few of the /24s are accounting for larger than their fair share of traffic. As you can see, the 45 and the 105 right in the middle are relatively flat. The only thing you see is the kink in the middle, and that kink, we know what the cause for that is. That's basically caused by the configure. There's a bias in the way configure worm targets or scans for other potential targets. So we know that kink, and if you factor out that kink, the traffic is relatively uniformly distributed across those blocks. The 5/8, on the other hand, you see very strong curve, very strong hotspotting. 23/8, the same thing, and 37/8 and 100/8 as well. Once again, in the 100/8, it's human memorizable addresses. We see a lot of packets going to 100.100.100.100. But let's do some interesting case studies very quickly. So in the 37/8, this was very interesting. Now, here you would think it's not one of those easy ones. It's not 1.1.1.1. So why would you see such strong hotspot activity? So you're looking at 2 graphs here. One is the top 10 destinations, /16 destinations within the 37/8. And the graph on the right is for /24s. And what you see, not only is a single /16 accounting for the bulk of the traffic, but it's a single /24 within that 16 that's accounting for most of this traffic. So we dug in a little bit more. This is the distribution by ports of how much traffic we're seeing. Destination port 80 was very prominent in this traffic. And what we found was when we figured out, when we analyzed the traffic by hand, we found all of it was going to a single IP address, and that IP address, as we found out, was quoted in a blog entry as being one of the IP addresses used for fake responses for blocking Facebook. So a single IP address is causing this enormous spike in traffic for unused address space. The 23/8, once again, we see very strong hotspot activity. If you look at the /24 distribution, a single /24 is accounting for most of the traffic. And when we slice it more, once again, it's a single IP address that's accounting for most of the traffic. The UDP destination port for that traffic is 3100, source port 2109. It's a single UDP stream. Well, what is it? As it turns out, we took all that stream out, tried to extract something out of it, and it turned out to be a video stream. And we said, okay, well, that's interesting. Who's sending video to Darknet? We decoded it, and it turned out to be 1080p video. Video going to the Darknet. Nope, it's not porn, unless you're really weird. It was actually, copyrighted video, so I probably shouldn't play too much of it. It's essentially movie streams from Animal Planet. And in this case, once again, we know that somebody's sending this traffic out there, it's misconfigured, and they don't know that they're streaming HD quality video into nowhere. Once again, very good candidate for cleanup. We could probably track this person down. 100, on the other hand, is an odd case. It's one of the ones that makes you scratch your head because it's got a little bit of everything. There's very strong hotspotting activity, as you can see once again, and the distributions are fairly high and they don't drop off as rapidly. You can see /16 distribution on the left and the /24 traffic volumes on the right. And once again, 100.100.100.100 is the biggest culprit by far, but the others are also not insignificant. The distribution by port numbers is also not very clear. We see some port 445 activity, which is configure once again, some activity on 1640, we don't really know what that is. UDP, of course, has source destination ports, 10,000, 161, we know what that is, that's SNMP misconfigured somewhere, 53, DNS backscatter, so it's got a little bit of everything going on. So we're still, we've only made one pass of analysis through the data. All we know is 100/8 is definitely interesting. It's got all kinds of stuff. We don't know the details about them yet. 5/8 turns out to be an interesting one, and we were a little surprised by this. But I think, once again, it's largely because the 5 number is very easy for humans to type and remember. And the kinds of traffic we're seeing in here are, once again, huge spikes. We don't know what the source of those spikes are. The source IPs vary, the port numbers vary, but they're all 250 byte packets, and they're all zeros. We're not sure. ICMP6 traffic, interestingly, very large volumes of ICMPv6 traffic. So if anybody wants to know where IPv6 is going to catch on, well, probably darknet. And some other interesting flash video clips which we haven't decoded yet. So no more video clips. Moving very quickly to the other /8s. 105, fairly flat, very uninteresting. It's interesting to note that the volumes that I've been using on these graphs on the left, right? This number right here is 14 gigabytes. For the other graphs, this was of the order of 200, 300, 500. So both 105 and the 45 are orders of magnitude more quiet than the others. Very little of interest in terms of analyzing them. We see consistent patterns. Port 445 for configure, port UDP port 53 for DNS backscatter, and same thing across 45. So to conclude very quickly, once again we're finding that pollution tends to greatly skew darknet traffic activity. Different darknets can have different reasons for being polluted, but you're starting to get a feel for what basic baseline darknet traffic looks like. We know it's going to be about 15 to 30 megabits per second of base traffic, spiking occasionally to 70 megabits per second, maybe 200 megabits per second, depending on what's going on. Heavily dominated by configure for TCP, and heavily dominated by DNS backscatter for UDP traffic. We're sharing our results with the relevant RIRs so that they can make appropriate decisions about what to do regarding cleanup or quarantine. And in conclusion, here's the list of specific /24s that we think deserve particular attention from this batch of analysis. Once again, the 45 and the 105 are relatively good, but the others, we've highlighted what the key 24s are. That's it. Questions? Jared.
I've done some analysis of a few different people who've been doing SIP scanning and going in actually trying to initiate fraudulent phone calls. And there's a couple of instances where I've seen the RTP media set to be essentially what's a dark or darknet IP address, either 1.1.1.1 or 1.2.3.4. And obviously you're seeing people sending RTP media there as well. Did you look for any of these RTP streams that look like G711 ULAO or whatnot, or did you encounter that very often?
No, I think those were not standing out as obviously as they were in the 1/8. I'm sure if we were to look a little bit finer, a little bit deeper, we'd probably find it there. So yeah, we can take another pass at that.
Okay. Yeah, what I found is these are people who are calling some fraudulent number in order to rack up, the premium toll charges or whatnot, and then they just send the RTP media to somebody to basically be discarded or whatnot. So something to look for.
Thanks.
Really just a comment as opposed to a question. I'm Brandon Ross, and I'll speak with my interop net volunteer hat on. The 45/8 net, I was shocked and surprised you found to be relatively clean, because for many, many years we've, when setting up for the show, we would announce the 45/8 out of, say, a T1 or something on that order of size and crush it with all the background crap going to it. But other people have, I've never actually did any real analysis of what was there. So I found the comparison to the other /8s, the fact that it being clean, to be shocking.
Yeah. Well, it's comparative, right? So when I say clean, we're still talking about 15 to 30 megabits per second. So with a T1.
And that is consistent with what we would see. It seemed to average out around 20, 25 meg most of the time.
Great. Thanks.
I don't know when it's sorry.
Just want to get off this slide.
Next up, Jim Cowie from Renesas, talking about the Egyptian internet connections right now. There you go, Jim.
Thanks. Now, what is this again? Control L? I always have this issue. All right, thanks. If I seem fuzzier, even than normal, it's because I have not gotten a lot of sleep in the last 5 days. And it's because of this. So Egypt left the internet. We'll start off, I've asked a couple of friends to donate some slides here to help us tell this tale. Craig was good enough to give me the Arbor Atlas data that shows you what traffic normally looks like. This is really the very first sign of something. Well, this is what traffic normally looks like. You get these nice spikes. Diurnal traffic pattern, you're doing 12, 13 gigs a day in. You're easily doing a gig or so out. And of course, on Friday last, everything goes away. Drops down to ultimately tens of megs. There's not a lot of traffic left headed for Egyptian prefixes. So thanks to Arbor for that data. What happened? Well, you know from reading the paper, what happened, basically what we saw was shortly after midnight Friday, over the space of about a bad 20 minutes, each of the major Egyptian providers pulled their routes. They went from approximately 3,500 routes, many of which were little D aggregates, down to about maybe 150 in the space of 20 minutes. Now, global BGP convergence, as you know, takes about 30 seconds. Maybe at the outside it takes 60 seconds. I'll show you that these came in waves and they were longer than that apart. So it tends to suggest that there isn't one big kill switch. It's individual providers in sequence leaving the net. Miriam, you want to take a look?
Sure, I'll just jump in here to show you what we've done at the RAP NCC. The URL on top also has some live updated graphs, so you can follow what's going on at the moment there. These graphs look very empty. But this is a snapshot of what happened during that time on the 28th of January. On top, we looked at the prefixes that were allocated to Egypt by Afrinic and look at the announcements and withdrawals, and you can clearly see how it stops there on top. And at the bottom graph, you can see the number of announced prefixes dropping at the same time. So yeah, that's quite impressive image, I think. And yeah, go to their website and you can follow, how this will continue. Do you want to take over again?
Jump back in. And it's important to get this data from as many independent perspectives as possible because any one of us could have blown this analysis. So what happened? Back to the Renesas data. Take a look at the IPv4 space as it's laid out. So we've made a big heat map here using the Hilbert curve. layout that you've seen in XKCD and elsewhere, thanks to the measurement factory for the software. So the gray blocks are routed. The black blocks here are unrouted space, even though the internet is now full. And the orange little dots you see towards the middle there are Egypt. And so if you look before and after using the same map, you zoom in on the Afrinic allocations and you can see the orange blocks that Egypt previously had just gone, just vanished. So as I said before, it doesn't suggest a kill switch, or I've heard stories that all the infrastructure goes through a single piece of hardware. It doesn't look the case to me. If you look through this, and we'll show you an animation at the end that calls this out even a little more clearly, but these people are leaving the internet a couple minutes apart, up to several minutes apart. And it looks like sort of human phone call timescale. It's interesting because if you go back beforehand, you look for signs of congestion. These are traceroute latencies for our monitoring from New York into all Egyptian prefixes, and you see that basically latencies were pretty stable up until the point where we couldn't do any more trace routes to most of the prefixes in Egypt. So you don't see signs that the Egyptian government was doing what Iran did, for example, after their election, which was throttling and congesting on purpose. It's interesting, as a side note, to look at the same view from the inside. Here's our Cairo machine trace routing to everything in Egypt. And you know what? It still takes 180 milliseconds at the 50th percentile, mostly because the state of peering there as elsewhere is pretty bad, and a lot of traffic goes to London and comes back. So what was left after the event? Well, there were several sources available, and we have tried not to identify all of them too graphically to the media. We will show you the one that everybody knows about. Traffic did continue to flow, so we hear at sort of minimal levels. There are still some routes left. Even though the routing is up, routing is necessary but not sufficient for connectivity. Lots of the trace routes that you'll do inbound to the remaining surviving prefixes will die on the seabone at Palermo. There's lots and lots of sites in Egypt that are reachable, perhaps, but you can't get there because they have DNS issues. As an example, you could still get to the stock exchange until before yesterday. But the institution that does their trade settlement was down. So at some point, an internet-connected economy falls below the critical threshold where you can actually do business. Ironically, some IPv6 actually stayed up. A lot of these were Internet 2 peers carrying IPv6 routes. So if you kind of multiply Internet 2 times IPv6, I think nobody really noticed that they were still up. Here's the one that was became well known after the BGPmon folks named them in the initial post, which was the NOR group. NOR group, of course, didn't go down until yesterday. NOR group is interesting, and we think that the reason they may have been left online is because they have a lot of great customers, including the people I talked about before in the financial industry. Also includes the Commercial International Bank of Egypt and the Egyptian Credit Bureau, a few others. So status today, about 75 prefixes still up, but they really don't trace. I don't know that there's a lot going on. Interestingly, Telecom Egypt actually has some Jordanian customers. There's about 8 prefixes for Jordanian space, and we don't know if that's co-located in Egypt or if it's terrestrial, but that stuff is still online. This was very much an Egyptian event. This doesn't look at all like the Egyptian cable cuts that we've studied before. As you've seen in previous years when we've done our reports on cable cuts, you see lots of different countries downstream, people who are trying to get by on CME 3 and 4 and flag, and it's a broad spectrum event. And this was obviously a very specific event, only Egyptian prefixes down. We are monitoring everything that's going on to see if anything else becomes unstable. And just before I came up, CNN was announcing that Hosni Mubarak will no longer stand for re-election. We'll do a quick visualization here, as promised. This is at something the guys back in New Hampshire cooked up. It's at 60 times real-time speed playback, so 1 second per minute. We're going to show you what we call a piecewise Hilbert curve, become clear in a second, depicting the actual prefixes that Egypt had, and then they will flash white as they are withdrawn and fade to black. This is the still. And let's get it up here. This is why they say don't do this in the main session. Good. All right. Fingers crossed. Okay, time is scanning through at the bottom from left to right. Raya Telecom in blue, Etisalat in green, Link Egypt in red, TE in green. We'll do this again in a second. Internet Egypt in pink, and everybody else is in gray at the bottom. And you see the blocks now flashing as we roll past 22:30 UTC, which is just past midnight 30 Cairo time. And that's it. That's it. Everything is now left. You see a little dust at the bottom, which is the Noor group and a couple of other small blocks. So the first, this is again staggered sequence. So TE is the incumbent. They lead right off and they go out. Raya goes a full minute later. Link Egypt 4 minutes later, right? So this doesn't smell like one piece of equipment or one instantaneous push button. Etisalat takes themselves out 2 minutes later. And you can see that everybody still has a little bit of space left. It's a sort of a gradual takedown. Internet Egypt goes 6 minutes later, and now we're really getting down into the bottoming out part of this curve. It's almost like watching soap bubbles pop. As the less specifics go away, leaving the more specifics, they're tiny, they're gone. And that's the end of the story. So that's it. Thanks very much.